If you like an apple tart with a crispy crust every single time, then Tarte Tatin is the apple tart for you. A Tarte Tatin has a crispy pastry every single time because the pastry cooks on top of the apples instead of underneath. Now, legend has it this tart was invented by two young ladies called Tatin. They had a bakery, they were making pies. One forgot to put the pastry on the bottom. The other one said, don't worry about it, we'll just flip it over when it's done. And Tarte Tatin was born. We're going to start by rolling out our pastry so that we have it ready to place it on top of our apples once our apples are cooked. I've got some flour here. Pastry down on a little silicone rolling mat. We're going to roll this out to at least 10 inches because that's the size of our pan. If you're using a bigger pan, roll the pastry out so that it at least covers and folds over the side of your pan. You can use a store-bought pastry for this, or you can make your own pastry. If you'd like to make your own pastry, check out our basics segment on pie dough. Once your pastry is in a nice circle, measure it against your pan just to make sure that you certainly have enough pastry plus about an inch to fold over the edges. With that done, we want to keep our pastry cold for as long as possible. That's the beauty of using a silicone mat. I can just roll that pastry up, pop this into the refrigerator until I'm ready to use it. In a 10-inch skillet, turn the heat on, put it on about medium-high. And what we're going to do is make a caramel. We're going to add some sugar and some water. We're going to swirl this together until that sugar dissolves, and then we're going to watch it brown. What we're not going to do is stir. You do not want to introduce a spoon of any kind in here because it will cause the sugar to caramelize and form a chunk. It does take a little while to make your caramel, but once the sugar starts to brown, it gets brown really fast. So don't walk away at this point. No stirring, no leaving. So you'll see it start to caramelize a little bit around the sides. Give that a swirl. It'll become uniform, and then remove it from the heat. It's going to continue to cook a little bit in the pan. You might see a little bit of smoke coming from it. No big deal. Just swirl the pan around, and then it'll become uniformly brown. Set that aside. We'll let it cool for a minute. We'll get our apples ready. With the apple, the only thing you want to think about is which apple should I use? Basically, one that doesn't fall apart when it gets hot. So apples like Granny Smith, Pink Lady, Honeycrisp, Gala, these are all good apples to use. Today I'm using Granny Smith apples. I've peeled them and quartered them, and now I'm going to toss them in a bowl with a little bit of sugar. Now you can vary the amount of sugar that you want to use on these apples based on how sweet your apples are. Granny Smith, a little bit tart. I'm adding a little more sugar than I otherwise would. We're going to add the apples to the pan. It may have hardened up or solidified in your pan. Don't worry about it. It's going back into the oven where it's all going to melt down again. Now arrange the apples in a decorative manner. Once you've got a pretty layer down, put the rest of them on in any shape or form you like. I like to build them up in the center a little bit so that when the pie is finished, it doesn't cave in the middle. With that done, all we have to do now is dot the apples with a little bit of butter. Ultimately, in the oven, the butter is going to react with the caramel and form a beautiful creamy caramel sauce. Now let's take out our pastry from the fridge. And we're going to unroll this pastry onto the tart. Now this is obviously bigger than we need, which is a good thing because we're going to tuck this inside the apples. Take a paring knife, cut off any excess that's more than, say, an inch. Grab a spatula and we're just going to tuck the pastry inside the pan. Now you do want to be a little careful because this is still a warm pan, so just do the best job you can. Now you do want to make sure your pan that you've put everything in is oven safe. We're going to be cooking this at 375 degrees. So a handle that is not plastic is the best. I'm venting the center of the pastry, making a little hole there. That's going to allow any steam to escape and not burst out the side. And finally, for a little bit of color, I'm going to brush a little egg wash on top. Egg wash is just simply a little beaten egg. This will give a nice shine to the pastry and help it brown. One last thing before we put this into our preheated 375-degree oven, make sure there's a sheet pan on the rack below the pie. That's just in case anything spills out, we don't want to have to clean the oven. It'll take about 45 minutes to 60 minutes for that pastry to brown and crisp beautifully, for the apples to become tender, and for that caramel sauce to come together beautifully. Let's give it a check and see how it's doing. First off, pastry looks great, take a paring knife and just gently make one little piercing into it just to feel how the apples are. If they feel tender, you're good to go. Now let this cool for just a few minutes before you want to invert it. Remember, this is hot caramel, so we're going to be very careful turning this out. First things first, make sure that your plate is bigger than the skillet that your tart is in. Second, put mitts on both hands. We're going to turn this out, and there is a chance that some of that sauce will come out, and we don't want it to spill on you. So invert the plate onto the skillet, grab the skillet and the plate together, and in one movement, turn that over onto the plate. Look at the beauty that you have created. And all you need to do now is let this cool a few more minutes, top it with some whipped cream, and serve it up.